Hi, my name is Simon Howard and I'm a solution architect at Micro Focus. So this video is about the workflow associated with performing a dynamic scan or dynamic assessment of a web application or website using Fortify on demand. So in front of you, you see a deliberately vulnerable web application for a fictitious site called Zero Personal Banking. We've designed this for demo purposes and also for people to try out. At the bottom, there is a disclaimer that shows that it's designed for this purposes. Basically, it's not representative of the way that you should implement a web application. So we're going to scan this application during this video and then look at the results. So let's bring up Fortify on demand. So I've already logged in to a demo tenant that we have using my credentials. And this is the applications view, which you may be familiar with. I created a new definition of the Zero Personal Banking application in Fortify on demand. These are applications that have been defined already. And I did that using the new application wizard. That's beyond the scope of today's video. I'm going to find it here. And now here are the applications that match that definition. This is the one I want. I'm going to go into it. And during the creation of the application, I created one release, version 1.0. You have to do that when going through the wizard to create an application. This application has not been scanned before. I can see there are no issues. And indeed over here, I can see it hasn't been scanned. There'd be a tick icon if it had been, and probably some results. So to scan this application, what I need to do is select Start Scan Dynamic. Now, when you scan an application, you have to fill out the fields in a form called the Dynamic Scan Setup form or view. Now, I've already done that for this application, but I want to go through them with you. So there is a field where you define the URL, the root URL that you want to test. So that's the URL of the site we just looked at a few minutes ago. You want to define the type of assessment or scan, if you like, that you will do. There are two choices for a website. There's an additional choice, which is for web service testing, but obviously we're not doing that. So my choice for this test is either a dynamic assessment or a dynamic plus. The main difference between the two is that with a dynamic plus scan or web assessment, after the automated part of the scan has been completed using the Web Inspect, there is an up to 8-hour test performed by a member of our security team. Now for this demo, this video, I'm just going to do a dynamic web assessment. I have two choices of assessment, or rather, beg your pardon, no, entitlement that I can use. Now, if this was a legacy application, which I wasn't going to modify later after scanning, I could choose a single scan, which would mean it would be scanned once, and then I'd have an option of doing a remediation scan within 30 days. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to select subscription. This is indeed typically what you would do if your application was under development, because it's the more cost-effective way of doing scans. And indeed, you could integrate it into some automation tools you have, or even to a CI process. I'm going to specify the time zone. I'm based in the UK, so I'm going to keep it as this one here. And then I need to specify whether it's an external facing or internal facing application. So this website is accessible from anyone or by anyone. So it's an external facing application. Then I define the scope. So here I can define whether I want to scan the whole site or restrict it to a certain set of folders, or I can choose to exclude certain parts of my site by specifying, for example, that I want to ignore the stats page for some reason. Maybe there's some issues, whatever, that I don't want to scan that, it's under development, whatever. I'm going to scan everything on this site. Then I can optionally define credentials. So there are different ways that Fortify on demand can use your credential you provide in order to access the full site, for example. Now, typically what you will do is use a forms authentication method where you have to specify the details of the username and password of 2 users. Usually they're test users specific to the scan rather than genuine users. And then that's it. You just specify that. The reason you specify 2 is we could lock one out. Then you specify when you want the scan to be done. Now, that's typically done if you're doing a subscription or if you signed up for a subscription. I'm going to leave it as is. So I'm just going to do it once for the moment. And then you specify any additional details. So here I can choose the user agent to be used in the scan. I'm going to leave that the same. I can provide additional notes to the FOD team. Often what you might do is upload some documentation that could be useful for any manual aspects of the scan. I would locate it and then upload it. So I fill those fields out and then I'm ready to go and do my scan. I'll save any changes that I've made. Didn't make any, but I'll just save it anyway. And then to start the scan, I just click Start Scan. Now this is a manual scan. This is just one way of doing scans. You could scan using our REST API, for example, integrated with tooling. That's just one way. Okay, so I'm going to click Start Scan. The changes have been saved. Again, I'm going to say I want to do it as soon as possible right now. I'm going to say Next. It's going to do some validation for me. I'm going to click Next. And then finally check everything. I'm okay. Start scan. And there you go. The scan has been scheduled. I can now exit this page. I'll go back to this page here, which will show me what's happening with this application. And you can see that a scan is now scheduled. Okay, my scan has completed successfully and my results are available. So right now I'm on the releases page for the Xero Personal Banking app. I can see it completed. There's a green tick here that tells me when it completed. I can see there are some vulnerabilities which are broken down into the critical, high, medium, and low buckets, if you like. I can see the scan failed the security policy. The app had a star rating of 1 out of 5. From this view, there are several ways I can look at my information. I could click any one of these ovals here to drill down into specific issues, or indeed these ovals up here as well, which ultimately would show me, the scans of different releases. But right now, there's obviously just one scan being done. Or in my case, I'm just going to go and drill down into another view called the Release Details view. Now, in this view here, I would usually see trending information to show my vulnerabilities going up and down in the different criticality levels or buckets, if you like, through time. But only one scan's been done, so there's no graph here right now. I can see some information about scans that I need to do in certain time constraints according to my security policy. So for example, for this particular application, it says I should or must complete a static scan by this date. Now what I'm going to do is go and look at the Analysis tab. So in this view, I get a breakdown in this vertical bar chart of all the vulnerabilities across all of the criticality levels. Straight away, I can see there are 8 web server misconfiguration unprotected directory issues that are new, 100% new to this application. They're new. In fact, all these vulnerabilities you can see are new because this is the very first scan that I've done. And indeed, these little bars are actually hyperlinks as well, so I can go straight to the particular type of vulnerability if I want to, or any of these ones down here. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to click on this oval here, and that'll take me straight to the 4 critical issues that were found in this particular scan. So now I'm in the Release Issues view for 1.0 version of this application. In this column here, I've got a list of the 4 critical issues. I could click any of these other ovals here to look at the high medium or low issues, and in fact all of them in one go. I can group them by category, or for example OWASP 2017 categorization, or other ways, and so on. But what I'm going to do is stick with what I have, which is category. I quite like that. That's great to explain it. So there are two cross-site scripting reflected issues that were found, and one is selected already, this one here. In this central view here, I get several sets of information. I get the vulnerability information, recommendations on what to do for each vulnerability. HTTP tab shows me the request and response traffic, more evidence, including screenshots, and history, audit history for this vulnerability. So, what actually happened when I conducted the scan? Let's look at that first, so that's a key thing to know. So, when the scan was performed, the first thing we did was we verified the URL that you provided on the form and the credentials of the web application to be assessed. Then we conducted a web inspect scan of your application, given the criteria you specified. That web inspect scan is in essentially two stages. First, we crawled the web application, and this application is not a single page application, although we absolutely do support that. But it's a traditional application with a set of pages. So we scanned each of those pages, we crawled it if you like, looking for attack surfaces on each of those pages, so text boxes, for example, where a SQL injection might occur. So we identified those attack surfaces and identified agents that could be used to attack those attack surfaces. Then we went to a second stage where we performed that attack. And as we do that attack, we look for vulnerabilities. If we see them, we record the request and response traffic. And that's what you see in the results. And once that whole scan is completed, then the results go to a member of the FOD team, an FOD security expert, who then looks at those results and removes any false positives that they can see. And then the results are published to you. That's what we're seeing right now. So for this vulnerability, in the vulnerability tab, and indeed it's the same for any vulnerability you see that's reported to you, you'll see a summary paragraph with a summary of this vulnerability. So it's a cross-site scripting vulnerability of the reflected type. And you'd normally, as part of your triage process, read through the documentation here, this information we provided. Now, your experience level will vary. Sometimes you'll know what this vulnerability is precisely, so you can read through this pretty quick, or maybe this is the first time you've seen this type of vulnerability. FOD is designed to be self-service, so it's designed in a way that so there should be enough information for you to understand this vulnerability. So you read the summary paragraph, then you'll read the explanation paragraph, which gives guidance of what a cross-site scripting vulnerability is in this case. Then you'll see an instance ID that uniquely identifies this particular instance of this particular type of vulnerability in your application, and a rule that was used to find the vulnerability. Then a reference out to the different standards and best practices that apply. So you read through that. Then you might be thinking, okay, what actually happened in this vulnerability when it occurred? So I can go to the HTTP tab, and then you see the request and response traffic that was recorded for this vulnerability. If I click this here, this kind of helps to explain it. So you can see that this thing called search term, doesn't matter what it is for this demo, was set to this here. So here, the agent has tried to enforce, or rather make a cross-site scripting vulnerability occur, or find it, if you like, and think of it that way. Again, I'm going to click here, the word wrap there, response traffic. And if I scroll down, this is what came back at that time of the vulnerability. And you can see, oh dear, there is some JavaScript code that the agent successfully injected, and we got a response back. What might that have looked like visually? Well, we tracked that too as well. We kept a record of that. So we go to more evidence, look at screenshots, and there is a screenshot, a JPEG. I can view it, or I can download it, or delete it. So I'm going to view it. And this is what actually happened during the scan. You can see a dialog occurred because of that cross-site scripting vulnerability. Let's go look at another vulnerability. Another cross-site scripting vulnerability occurred. We can see there's a screenshot here, and we can go and see what happened in this particular case. A different dialog appeared on a different page. So let's go back to the first vulnerability we looked at, and let's think about what might actually happen. So I've looked at the vulnerability tab, I've looked at the screenshot, and now I'm thinking, okay, so what do I do about it? So let's go to the recommendations tab. So for any vulnerability, we'll give you guidance on what you typically need to do to fix this type of vulnerability. So you would normally read through that, get the applicable guidance, get some tips of what to do. And depending on essentially the contract that you have with us, then you may or may not have access to interactive training provided by our partner Secured Code Warrior. If that's available, if you have that, then you can click on Launch Training there and go do that. It offers a gamified type interface. You'll look at the references here. If you want to, go and link follow out to, say, the OWASP site, for example, and get more guidance about this type of vulnerability. And at the end of that process, for any vulnerability, what you'll do is you will essentially generate some audit information for the rest of your team, and you may raise a ticket. So let's look at that. So there are a set of users on this tenant. There's a demo tenant. I could assign this vulnerability, when it's selected, to any one of the users. So I'm going to select, just for the point of this demo, myself, actually, pretending I'm somebody else. I assign it to me. I'm going to change the developer status to in remediation to indicate it's now being remediated. We're looking at it. And I'm going to say, needs looking at. And now that's added to the audit history for this vulnerability. Typically, of course, what you will do is create a bug. Now, this application, this Zero Personal Banking application, is not integrated with the bug tracker, but I can do that in the settings for this application. If I had done that, then this button here, the Submit Bug button, would not be disabled, and I could basically click that, and I could go and raise a ticket for this particular vulnerability. You can actually do that for more than one if you wanted to. So, for example, if this second one was related, I can raise one ticket in one go against several vulnerabilities. For any vulnerability, if I decided that vulnerability was a false positive, this one isn't, by the way, but if I did decide that, I could just click this Mark as False Positive button, and then this will be marked as a false positive and it will not appear again for this application. So that's the workflow when you're doing an audit. Let's go look at another vulnerability. This one here. You can see the information shown here is entirely different for the Recommendations tab. Indeed, it is for the Vulnerabilities tab, and so on. So you can see it varies per vulnerability. I'll look at one more vulnerability, or the critical vulnerabilities for this scan. We'll look at this one here. We're looking again at the Vulnerabilities tab. You can see we've got a summary paragraph with different information about this type of critical vulnerability, the privacy violation, guidance. If we look at the traffic, we can see here, just refreshing. We can see, if we go down here, we'll go straight to the response traffic. You can see down here, if we look. There we go. You can see that an actual credit card number was returned in the response. So that's clearly not good. And as per normal, in the Recommendations tab, we get guidance on what to do. And it's essentially saying you should mask data. Okay. So at this stage, you've done this triage. Imagine you've done that, and imagine you really want to flag to someone else within the organization that there are some issues being found in your web application, whether you scan it for the first time or not. So expand that menu out here. You can see I've got the ability to generate reports. So let's go to that reports view for this application. Now, for the sake of this demo, I've already done this, but what I did was I created two reports. One, a dynamic comprehensive report, which is at the developer stroke tester level, so really quite technical, or the dynamic summary report. And I did that using this new report wizard. You just click that and you generate reports according to the templates that you have. The report templates are customizable. You can create your own. That's pretty easy to do. You create it with a drag and drop interface. You can define what information you want to see in reports. In this case, I'm using some off-the-shelf ones. So let's go look at them. So let's go look at the dynamic summary report first. So this is a type of report that's aimed for, let's say, a team lead, or maybe a bad example, maybe a department head, whatever. So let's go look at it. You can obviously look at it in your folder, directly in your, your reader. I'm just going to open it directly here. And you can see I've got a title page, that's part of the template, a nice summary of the vulnerabilities we've found in the scan, key stats, and a nice little pie chart there, a breakdown. Worth pointing out, by the way, on that page there as well, that as part of this offering that was performed for this scan, so it's a dynamic subscription, we also perform continuous application monitoring. It's the first scan, so it's not listing anything there. Okay, let's go back. And let's look at the other one, the dynamic comprehensive report. Download that. Go look at that. Again, the title page, if I scroll down, same information here on that page there. Again, the breakdown. But this time, in this template shows me a lot more information. I'm scrolling down further. And now you can see for, I think, that very issue that we looked at, the reflected issue, here's the summary information, explanation. So much more detail. So you can imagine a use case where you might actually share that information with maybe an offshore team or some other team that you have internally. So that's reports. You can see it's really easy to share that information with other people. Okay, so that is the end of this video of the workflow for a dynamic scan. I'll see you in the next video.